Hello, I'm Paul Briley, and you're listening to Off the Comma. I'm a human who cares about supporting other humans. On this podcast, we explore all facets of what it means to feel stuck in life. We talk with people just like us who found themselves sitting on a comma and not knowing where to go next. We'll unpack the experience with them, where they've been stuck, what it feels like, what they experienced, and what they learned. My goal is to inspire you by seeing yourself in others. I believe that when we feel more connected and seen, magic can happen. And remember, if you find yourself sitting on a comma in your life, you can also talk to me without a microphone. To explore coaching with me and getting off the comma in your own life, check out my information and book a call with me at offthecomma.com. And I'm also doing something different. I'm curating my own sponsor community, local businesses and professionals who I handpick and who align with our vision here. Be sure to check them out, learn more about them on my website and my YouTube channel. In the meantime, let's get into this week's conversation. And we are back and very excited to be back again with yet another amazing story about getting off the comma. And this week will certainly be no exception to all of the many, many weeks that we've been very fortunate to have on this podcast. And I'm very excited and grateful to be here with yet another cool guest, and another guest who I'm very fortunate to have be new to my circle. I don't have a lot of history or background with Lynn Mull, who we're going to be talking to today. So I'm very much looking forward to getting to know Lynn, meet her through her story today, and to be able to create a space where that story can come alive for each of you. So I could continue to ramble like I usually do at the beginning of every episode, and instead I'm not. I'm going to hand it over to you, Lynn. Lynn, welcome. And before we get into your story here in a little bit, let's start with intros. Tell us, how would you like to be known, and what would you like for us to know about you?
I do feel like I love the way you're introducing all of your episodes, but I'm Lynn Mull, and I would say my job title is a holistic career coach and author. But if you were inviting me to a party or trying to convince someone to come to a cocktail party, I would want everyone to describe me in a couple of ways, getting rid of that title, those roles we've had. But I'm an organizer, so I love to organize, whether it's I did a murder mystery party last year, which was really fun. Whether it's that kind of fun celebration, whether it's a retreat, I did a lot of that in my corporate work days as well, sort of gathering collaborators, whether it was for any sort of project. I love bringing people together. And I'm a leader and a seeker. So whether you've taken a million of those online quizzes, when I was growing up, it was like the back of a magazine. They would have these quizzes and it would be about, something funny on a glamour magazine. But really, I love to learn, seek, but I love to lead through it. So once I find something out, I want to share it, which I know is why you're here too. So leader, seeker, and then I'm a deep end friend. So if we're in it together. That goes for colleagues. I'm here to help protect, really, that protective mother nature, mama bear, and also promote. So I want all of us to do well. And if someone's in trouble or needs help, I'm there for them. But that comes with a lot of vulnerability and openness that I expect from people.
I so appreciate all of this descriptiveness. We're learning a little bit about you already. We haven't even gotten into your story yet, and how you kind of shared, and I'll acknowledge you for the fact that it's like when we take these roles on, like you said, a leader, a seeker, an organizer, those come with a certain degree of kind of like risk and consequences too, right? Because when you put yourself in front, or when life kind of calls for you to be in front, then there's going to be folks who are going to have things to say about it, right?
That's true.
Yeah.
Right. You put yourself out there, and sometimes you can lead from the front, you can lead from the middle, you can lead from behind. But in a lot of life, I've been either asked or decided to lead from the front. And you're right. It's a lot of, you get a lot of feedback, but that's okay. And I think that's where the part of me that likes to collaborate comes in, because I'm like, huh, that's an interesting idea. Or you did that, or we should be aware of this, and how it all fits together as a Rubik's Cube. That's when I lean back on other people. But then you get requests for more. And I'm like,
Mm.
huh, do I want to do another? I'm joking about this murder mystery party, but it was after COVID. No one had had any fun. We were just like, we dressed up, we decorated. It was an 80s murder mystery. We had a blast. And people are like, are you going to do that again? And I'm like, well, someone take the ball, go with it. Or,
Mm.
hey, where are we going to dinner? And again, I'm being very, very light about it, but sometimes it does create a sense of, oh, Lynn can do it. Lynn's got this. And I think a lot of people that I coach end up in that sort of in that world too. So it's a lot of boundaries.
Yeah, well, and I'm also hearing, and I'll kind of jump in and reflect and acknowledge throughout. By all means, correct me wherever I'm reflecting something that
Mm,
doesn't land or it's not accurate. But like, I'm also hearing that potentially there's a little element of, like in the seeker that you describe, a little bit possibly of exploring, like leading doesn't always mean leading in the same way. Like I like to lead in that I get to choose and do things differently,
yes.
and then move on to something new each time. Is that what I'm hearing as well?
Yes. I'm not afraid to try something different, even if it doesn't stick. I'm okay in that beginner's mind, or I'm okay to put myself out there in all of these things: podcasts, social media, writing. And I know people are looking at me from the sidelines with curiosity, like, what is she doing? Why is she doing it? But it brings, and in this world of social media, I tend to explore pretty publicly. Like, hey, I'm
Hmm.
going to try this, or I wrote an Oracle deck, and everyone's like, what's an Oracle deck? You were on Wall Street, or like insert name of thing I'm willing to explore. And I believe that it's important to have, I love having that open mind and then integrating it.
Mm.
So because otherwise you get really tired. You're like, oh, what's the new shiny object? And there's some of that. Like I'll think, oh, that author is really interesting, or I want to try to go hear that speaker. So you sort of have to calm down. Maybe that's age. When you're in over 40, you're like, I'm just gonna chill out. I like that. I'm gonna stick to it. But I do like that integration point too.
Yeah, cool. I love that concept. I'm curious to see how that kind of shows itself in the story that you're going to share with us, because it almost always does. Like the intro sometimes feels like it's a separate thing. It's the first slide, so to speak. But then it never fails. Like as I sit here and watch while we're having the conversation, it's like how many times it's like you literally said that 25 minutes ago, and now here it is. We get to see what that looks like in your life. So
Mm.
I'm curious to see that come up. Before we get into the five questions in your story, obviously we haven't talked about what you're going to be sharing with us today. I like to do something with every guest at the beginning. And so, Lynn, for you, as you think ahead to the next 45 minutes or so in sharing your story today, what intention would you have for yourself?
I think to have fun with it too, right? To have a lightness to a story. There are always parts on the comma, off the comma, where it can get dark. So just to have fun and enjoy this time together and be in it.
Okay. I see your intention, and my intention is to support that by, obviously creating a container for you to be able to share your story with us today. And that in doing so, there will be people out there who will see a little bit of themselves in you and your story. They'll feel a little bit more connected, a little less alone, and in the best of cases, feel a little bit more inspired or even empowered to go and do something that they've secretly, or maybe not so secretly, been wanting to do.
I hope so too.
Awesome. Let's jump into the first question. Lynn, where in your life have you found yourself sitting on a comma?
I believe that this is such a beautiful way to think about it. I love the idea, and
Mm.
I've used the word pause, which I think the comma really is. I've used the word pause, practical pauses. I like to use the word ampersand a lot, right? You're on this, there's two extremes and you're in the darn middle of it, right? So this comma really drew me in. So excited to record this today. But I was in a period of my life where I was in my 30s. I was in Manhattan. Manhattan's a lot for those who have lived there, stayed overnight, flown in. Even the airports are a lot. There's a lot of energy. The city has a lot of history and a lot of beauty in all of that, the art, all of it, the momentum. And I was working in finance, had what I call big girl jobs, but I really didn't love living. I'd come back to the East Coast, which is where my family was. My sister was in the city, but my heart was in San Francisco, and it still is for a lot of ways. But that being said, I was ready to move back to California, in Northern California, and I got a call that my mom had stage 4 colon cancer. It was an emergency surgery. She was the caregiver to all of my grandparents when they were sick. She was the caregiver for my dad, my sister, and I, and never really took care of herself as a teacher. And in doing that, our world it stopped. I ended up helping her through multiple, 8 years actually, but it ended up being 8 years of she's alive and is picking up my kids from school tomorrow. So all a good success story, but it really put a halt on. I had that out of body experience where like, what am I going to do here? So we talked about that leadership. I stepped up. I was the quarterback for her appointments, for researching doctors, calling in favors. And my sister and my dad, and her friends really surrounded her. But it took me stepping out of wanting to move back. And this continued on as I had 2 small children, got married. I said that in the inverse, but I got married, had 2 small children, was still caregiving, worried about my dad who was working caregiving, right? So we're all doing this dance. And the biggest part of the comma, sort of that edge at the top of that font, that comma, that boldness was upon returning from my second maternity leave, I got a call that my boss had been murdered. A mentor, a managing director in banking, lines outside of her office, people, mentees, all ages, all job descriptions, a diverse line of people, men, women, from young to old, asking for her advice. She had it together, so to speak. And in that moment, I remember where I was standing. I remember handing my daughter to my husband. I remember sitting down and thinking, hearing the news, unpacking it and thinking, this place is going to kill me. And when I went back to the office after that all settled, they literally sat us on the same floor of the office, the same cubicle setup, the same office floor. And they just shut her door. And I'm commuting, I'm scheduling nannies. They had a counselor in one day, and they had a very robust employee assistant therapy, all of it, right? So I leveraged a lot of it, but it wasn't enough. And I just felt literally stuck. And I literally felt like tipping over and looking on the other side and thinking, what am I going to do? I'm making good money. I have these big, important jobs, quote unquote. I was getting all of the funding for the project. You know what that's like, right? You're like, oh, you're on the big shiny object at work. I get to work on this really cool big thing. And I couldn't do it anymore. And I couldn't leave either, right? Holding the benefits, 2 small kids. And I had no plan.
Golden handcuffs, right? It's such a common story, right? But yours, man.
I really thought to myself, what are my options? What am I going to do here? And who am I going to talk to? My husband's commuting from where we live and still live outside of Philadelphia, not too far from New York City. He was commuting into New York City. We had 2 small kids. I was using the nannies for extra hours and I was traveling for work. Let's not forget that. I was commuting, traveling. And so I couldn't, and my mom was very, very sick, in and out of the hospital. My dad was a walking zombie from caretaking and working. And so I'm like, I need to do something. So I talked to a friend of mine who was a little bit more senior and in a different space. She was in more technology, M&A, and just really respected her, but I knew she wasn't in finance. So she didn't have that bias. And I really leveraged her, and she helped me peel apart what to do. And one of the things I did, which I still do with my clients today, is I She said, go ask people who you sort of know, who you've sort of worked with, what you should be doing next. Because we all, I think, have ideas. And I have a 4-year-old nephew, and he's like, I'm going to be a police officer, right? It's like you have these images or caricatures. And I was like, what am I going to do? I've been in finance my whole life. Like, this is who I am. Real ego attachment there. And every single person came back with teacher, educator, coach. The word coach came up like 10 times. And I thought, wow, it's really fascinating to see it come back to me that way. And it wasn't my sister who I asked. It was not my college best friend. It was not my husband or anyone in my family. I went like 2 or 3 people outside of my LinkedIn first connections, just got like 12 people to respond. And it opened my eyes to the possibilities. And then I started to chip away at whether you believe it, we have to do it in today's society or not. I started getting a coaching certification. I started to explore other opportunities. I started writing more for myself. And I started taking the energy that those golden handcuffs were taking, and I started to shift it towards, I guess then you would call it a side hustle, but really it was just me exploring into coaching, into writing.
Mm-hmm.
And I joke, one time I even made eye pillows for like a week. I was like, I know I'm going to be a sewer and I'm going to sew some eye pillows, because I had been in a massage and someone used it on me and I thought it was fantastic. But I did this all in pockets of time, and I had to get agreement from my husband with these small kids and all of this. We were all running in different directions. So it was like, hey, I would like to do a coaching certification. Let's see how much it's going to cost. Where am I going to do it? So once a month, I would go to New York and sleep on someone's couch for 3 nights and take a coaching certification. And I would do classes we did group coaching cohorts. I would do it at 6 a.m. every other Friday. So you have to make those arrangements. But I chipped away. It took me 5 years from that moment, looking over that comma, till me leaving.
Yeah. If I may, let me jump in for a moment. First of all, just kind of an acknowledgement and some reflection, right? Like the sheer stress, that's my word, that must have created for you. I mean, you're already, by its very nature, working in and doing work that is high stress, high energy, high action, high sensory overload, right? So in and of itself, the work is already a buzz. Then you've got a family, you've got a commute, you're traveling. And then the thing that happens to so many people that can be just monumental is, now I have a parent who needs essentially, full-time care or significant amounts of care, which was never on the job description and was never in the family planning book. And then add that to the fact that you were already kind of like, not necessarily the thing I'm enjoying the most anyway, what we started with. And now this kind of eye-opening moment on top of an already eye-opening moment with the loss of your mentor. She was a boss, yes?
Yeah, she was.
And so these relationships is what I'm seeing, like the relationship to yourself, these relationships to these women who have had a significant role in your life. And then it seems like this element of kind of like loss, because it was like potential loss with your mom, it's definite loss with your boss. And then what does loss mean for you in the middle of all that? I'm just kind of reflecting back what you've shared with us so far. Jump in, like, what will you add to that? Where have I been off base?
No, it's beautiful and thoughtful reflection. Thank you for that. I think at the time, you don't even know how stressed you are. And post children and going to Western doctors and even Eastern medicine, they're like, your cortisol's like, I don't know if we can ever bring your cortisol back to the level it's at, like a normal range. You are so hyped up. And what I love that you started with, and I often forget, and maybe listeners are forgetting, is sometimes when you're in it, you don't know. Like when you just acknowledged how busy my workload was or how intense it was, I'm like, I like shrugged it off in my head, but I'm like, oh, right. The pace at which I operate, and frankly still operate at, compared to the rest of non-finance people, is mind blowing. The gap in the speed at which we were required to
Mm,
work, constant. You were as good as your last email. And yet at the same time, I'm grateful for being able to make quick decisions and move on.
mhm,
But when you're talking about your life's work, your career, being able to pay a mortgage, you're like, oh, I can't just like make a quick decision and say, I'm out of here.
mm,
I think the interesting thing about loss is also I, what I want to impart, and maybe you notice this throughout your interviews, is that no one else in my peer group was really at the same spot. Most of them had had a kid or two. Most of them had been married or engaged. I was in my early 30s. Now, a lot of my peers in San Francisco and New York cities had gotten married in their mid, early, mid, late, even late 30s. So, on top of it, I'm calling them in tears about a diagnosis or a blood clot in my mom's lung. And they're like burping a kid, which I was also burping a kid.
mhm,
So, I think that loss of feeling included in what milestones my friends were in created a pretty large gap. And I think even to this day, I hadn't thought about it this way, honestly, until you just said it, but I think that's one of the major impacts. And for better or worse, has made me hyper independent.
mm,
So some of my conversations, my best conversations in that time in my life was with my parents' peers and in their 50s, and I was in my 30s. Or some of my conversations were with my next door neighbor who I really didn't hang out with, but there was enough of a space that she could hear and listen to me live in this panic state for a while. So I do
mm.
think there's something to the grief levels. Like, are you grieving loss of an ideal? Loss of an ideal. This is what my life is supposed to be in my 30s. What the heck is happening?
It's interesting. I can kind of self-reference here for a little bit because
Yeah.
I too had a situation where I took care of a mother. My partner and I took care of my mother late in life, or in her later years, very early in our life. And until you and I started talking about this, that didn't occur to me. You were describing the whole, I'm trying to talk to my coworkers about what it's like to take care of an aging parent and they're still burping a kid. And I had a similar experience too. And it never occurred to me that the sense of loss is like from that point that you start taking care of an aging parent or somebody who's got a critical health diagnosis or something like that. I don't know. Maybe we play with this a little bit, but like you said, you don't realize it when you're in it. But I can look back now and it's like, yeah, I lost innocence that day. I lost the youth of my 30s,
Yeah.
the kind of commonplaceness of what a lot of other people would probably be experiencing or expected to experience. So I don't know that I ever acknowledged that before. And it sounds like perhaps you haven't either, but like
Yeah. No, I haven't.
there were the losses that you could easily put your fingers on, but by its very nature, everything changed for you in that moment. And that also was a loss.
Yeah, I agree. People talk about 30s, you're sort of filling up or collecting new things, new titles,
Building, growing.
you're in this growth. You sort of have wrestled through your 20s where maybe you made a lot of mistakes or you still were climbing a ladder, which we can talk about too, but you still had this pathway. It was more frivolous, or at least my 20s were, and a lot of travel and spending and carefree. And then 30s are you're in that growth mode, really building. And to be tapped out,
Mm-hmm.
it's confusing. It's confusing to feel and experience that when a lot of other people, you'd get that phone call, I got this promotion, or I'm switching companies. And I'm like, I'm not looking for a new job. I'm barely eating here. I got to feed these two. And I think it also probably made me not a great friend because I was sideways. And so those friends who have stuck with me are like, thank you. Thank you for hearing me. Or I have had some of them acknowledge when now we're in our 40s, it's like, oh, I had no idea how much caretaking
Mhm.
takes out of you. I mean, just the sheer number of phone calls, forget visits, forget appointments. It's just,
And many
it's
folks
a
don't,
lot.
uh, uh, fortunately, question mark, right? Many folks don't experience that until they themselves are in their 40s or 50s, just by kind of the natural age dynamic and so forth. And by that time, they're further along in life, they're a little bit more established. They may have even come to a place of a little bit more free time. And now they're starting to be able to relate to that aging parent a little bit more. Not in your 30s. That's a complete shock. And so I'd love to
Yeah.
let me get to the second question. And then between question 1 and 2, you can go back and forth as much as you want. So I'm hearing, all of these difficulties in and of themselves, big challenges for someone in her 30s. Um, and in the middle of all of this is you with uncertainty, questing, exploring, trying to unpack how you even feel about things. And then, as you described, you started to realize, okay, no, I want to go a different direction. Let me start taking all these steps. Sounds like there was some overlap there as you were trying to hold down the primary while you pursue the secondary, soon to be the new primary.
Right.
All of this. The second question is, what did that create for you? This comma that you've been describing and sharing with us.
I was just ready to create, I call it new neural pathways. I was ready to step into this space to help myself. We teach what we need to learn, but help myself find another way to live and to operate. And then to help women, mostly women, although just as many men, if I'm being honest, the help them find another way to live and work.
Hmm.
I literally don't think, there are so many books or I really think authors are my celebrities because they do the research that help me, like you said, feel seen. I want and still want to help people who are in jobs that they don't love. Maybe they need to level up. You can still stay at your job and level up or change the dynamic. You can work with what we have and take it from a different angle and find a new perspective. I love working with really motivated people because I too am still motivated to bring other things to the world. But I think overall, the comma granted me the ability to find another pathway and to live in the and. That's what I do call it, living in the and. I have ampersands all over my office that even if right now is really hard, there will be a good day. Now, the good day could mean maybe a better diagnosis. It could be everything's cool and I can fold my laundry. Like it doesn't have to be this huge, put it on LinkedIn, put it on social media, huge thing. It can just feel in the moment that you have some level of
Mm.
stability. And then from stability can make decisions when your brain is a little bit calmer, when your energy pathways are a little bit more open to something that's potentially a real game changer.
I see that, and I see that in what you've described. And I also sense, so tell me if this isn't accurate, but I sense that in order to get to that place, because this is the thing I love to do in each episode, right? Like there's the story, and those of us who are listening, we do what humans do. It's like, yeah, I get that. I'm tracking, because we make assumptions, right? And probably accurate most of the time. But then there's like, wait a minute, like there's an opportunity to go a level or two deeper here based on this person's experience. And what I'm sensing, what's coming up for me is there's the comma you were sitting on and all the things you've shared so far. And then there's the where you come to, which is, okay, I found a different path, a different way to live and work. But there's
Mm,
something in between those two. And that was permission to ask questions, permission to challenge the status quo, permission to think differently than perhaps what we're
mm,
expected to think. So I'll stop there. That's kind of what I'm sensing is like there's these things underneath and in between that allowed you to transition from the comma to the where I think I'm going to go. What are your thoughts, or what would you correct me on?
I was on a really good track to, I was running national programs at one point, had 6,000 people working for me. I had big budgets, and I was on the track to, take the next two people's jobs, right? You've got division leaders in sales or something in operations. They were piloting things around me. I was in charge of these net new programs. And yet I didn't want any of it. And it's permission to say, I don't want any of that. Or that no longer appeals to me. Could I do it? Of course. And I think giving yourself permission to maybe I just don't want to anymore. Now I am not a fan of leaping. I'm not a fan of saying, unless you're in true traumatic situations or abusive situations, to just leave with a black and white. I think there's a transition in a lot of this, especially later in our careers or life. But I believe that I took a real zoom out. I was like, if I look ahead 2 years, if I look ahead 10 years, do I want her job? Do I want his job? Can I see myself moving to insert name of town that they were telling me they were going to open up a group call center, go to Charlotte, whatever the thing was? I don't want to do that. And I still have relationships with a lot of these people in these big banking jobs. So it's not like I said, why are you in that job, or badmouth them, or I didn't do any of that. I was just to your point, I was just observing. Permission to observe.
And ask the questions.
Am I interested in this anymore? I was an economics major. I still love macroeconomic cycles. I'm still fascinated by markets, scared sometimes, if I'm being honest. But I still am in all of that from a brain space. But I also want to do something different to have an impact. And it's like, where is that impact? Where should that impact be? And it's like, well, I love hanging out with motivated, high-powered people who are like, hey, I want to take a step and zoom out and see what are my options.
And what I really love about what you're saying, and obviously this holds true because you're a coach, and so you do these things with your own clients, right? But like, you don't even have to be a coach. Like, how many times, from what you've shared with us so far, how many times people would say, I mean, you have to take that job. If you're on that kind of a track, you have to take it because of so many reasons why, from scarcity mindset to family and cultural pressures to beliefs about opportunity and that sort of thing. So what I'm taking from what you said is like, just because that thing looks like what everybody else would say I have to take doesn't mean I have to take it. And two, it also means I don't have to give it up, because like you said, like, I still very much love finance and all these things that you described. You can still have those. You don't have to do that job to enjoy them. You don't have to make money off of it just because it's something you're good at. And there's other ways that you can transfer it or just enjoy it in and of itself for what it is.
Incorporate it in a different way.
Yeah. Let's go to the third question. And again, go back and forth as much as you need to. But the third question is, because I don't want to presume that you finished telling your story, but let's ask this. What have you learned about yourself as a result of sitting on this comma?
I was heading there anyway, but I am not afraid to be confident. Not in a narcissistic way, but regardless of how old you are, where you live, lot in life, there is something that you're good at. There's something I'm good at. I've had a lot of experience. I've grinded it out. I have opportunities to share that information. And so leading with that, there's so much in this space and in the world as a buzzword, the imposter syndrome. It's not really a buzzword. It's true. Even Oprah Winfrey and all these people talk about it. But at the end of the day, if I show up who I am pretty consistently and authentically, with a level of vulnerability, not totally open, I'm good with that. And I talk about it all the time, is that, not everyone is going to be those kids on the Mickey Mouse Club who were at 14 or 12 were superstars. Most of us
Mm-hmm.
have to walk a path to get there. So I do think that there's a level of confidence that I'm comfortable with, and maybe some people aren't. And I love that. I love public speaking. I love being out there. I love testing the waters. I love throwing out, hey, I'm trying ashwagandha in my cereal, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm open to that. I'm open to saying like, hey, I'm checking this out. That being said, I do think there's an ability for me to, as I come into this space, as I continue to learn, is that I am a seeker and not everything needs to be for public consumption.
Mm.
And a lot of it in this world is.
Well, and I also hear, and I'm self-referencing a little bit, right? Because sometimes I'll say, "Oh, because we all." No, 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 no. Let's be clear. Because
Mm,
this whole experimentation thing, right? Explore. Often, what I've believed is, if I explore or experiment with that, then I have to commit to it. Right. But what I'm hearing you say is like, just try it for the sake of trying it. Like, you don't even have to predict what you're going to do with it. You may like it, you may not like it. You know, you do that in basically the grocery store and restaurants all the time. You can do
right.
that in your life, is what I'm hearing from that. And it is something I've been trying to explore, these past couple of years. Like, just try it. And even though I'll do the thing, like try it, nope, didn't like it, I'll still notice how there's a part of me, because of my corporate background or the way that I was kind of raised or what have you, that's like, oh, if I didn't like it and I want to walk away from it, it's somehow a failure.
No, I don't. Sometimes people ask me if I miss it. I miss some of the people, but I don't regret leaving.
Mm,
On the other flip side that I want to jump back to, sort of tangential to this point, is that not only did I find people who I didn't want to be, or I didn't want their jobs, or didn't want their chair, but I found expanders. I found people who I did want to be. I thought, she just wrote her first book at 60, or whatever the person was, whether that is, I think, the good side of social
mm,
media is like, hey, this person's doing something cool. I know it's probably rose colored glasses, but that's an interesting thing that she created there. Or I know what book she read from 1972, and she brought it to the 2020. Okay, interesting. I love what she did there, and pulling apart these things that other people were doing, some of which lived in LA. I don't live in LA. I would love to, but it's not in my story right now. Not this
mhm,
round on the earth. So, how I don't want to mimic people, but just be like, oh, this is possible. And
mm,
I make my daughters, I do make them finish a season. So, like, okay, if you're going to play volleyball, you've got to finish the season. If you're going to play piano, we're going to pay for the 3 months of lessons. We're not quitting. We committed to 3 months.
mhm,
But then I do a check in with myself. Do I want to do that? Like, there's a couple of workouts that are happening in the world right now, and I'll try them. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. Or I send some of my friends to do fascia work
mhm,
with a friend of mine, and they're like, I didn't like that. I'm like, okay, I'm glad you tried it. That's not your
yeah.
thing. Maybe something else is. Maybe, working with a nutritionist is different. Whatever. I just think I think there's joy in the yeses and the nos.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're calling attention to something too, right? Like, it's one thing to try a new food. It's another thing to try something that's like a skill or, a behavior. And, like you said, with piano lessons, like, stick with it for 3 months. That's still trying. That's still an experiment. But like with piano, or whether it's a new sport or a new exercise routine or what have you, like, you can't really know if you're going to like it or not until you've gotten yourself into it deep enough to really have a sense. So
Right.
I guess really kind of the takeaway for me, and potentially for others listening, is like, you don't have to do it forever, but stretch yourself a little bit and give yourself a chance, because often the liking doesn't happen until the last chapter. You won't
Mm,
really know. And how many, this is crazy. Like, I'm literally like, the number of people in my life that have showed up right now that are teaching me the lesson of sticking
mm.
with it versus walking away. And so anyway, just very interesting that you showed up at this particular point in
I
time.
know. Well, I'm in a writing group Saturdays. I haven't been in quite some time
Hmm.
because I've got these active kids in the fall, but their schedules have slowed down. And and they know, and the group holds me. And sometimes I write really well and I share. It's a 75 minutes on a Saturday. And sometimes I'm like, you know what, guys, I don't feel like sharing today. I don't like what I wrote, or here's the theme of what I wrote, but I'm not sharing. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
best part, is sort of maybe you find that place, whether it's career or not, that can help it's practical. I hope we like more things. I hope we grow. And if everyone's playing pickleball and you don't want to play, that's okay. But maybe, you're going to speed walk with a weighted vest and that's your thing. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter. I just think giving up really doesn't make sense to me. So I could have given up. I could have fallen into middle to low management of my firm. I could have kept getting lazier. I could have done worse work. I could, just given up,
Mm-hmm.
stayed in the chair or been demoted and just given up. My bonuses would have gotten worse and I would have gotten paid down and all the things. I would have been pushed out eventually in some way, shape, or form. And I think that kind of giving up, there is another way. If you look at other people who are around you. And so what you and I are talking about is what I call clarity combinations, is give yourself a moment, a month, 6 weeks, 6 months, and say, I'm just going to just try a whole bunch of things and then
Mm-hmm.
write them down. I mean, I've explored everything. I'm going to be a yoga teacher full time. I actually found out I don't love teaching yoga, but I love doing
Mm-hmm.
it.
Mm-hmm.
So yoga teacher full time was on my clarity combinations. And we used to say, when we did mergers, we used to say, on these huge whiteboards, we used to say, there's no spelling doesn't count on the whiteboard. We were up at 2 a.m. still working. Like, just write it down. It's the same thing. Like, let yourself have this moment of play. And I'm sure this podcast feels like play. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
this huge thing. So,
But let me clarify though, because what I think you just said though is, because you were talking about, I wrote down slow quitting, right? You said I could have done this, I
mm,
could have done that, these kind of slowly exiting steps, even though that might not have been your original intention. Are you saying that you chose to, this truly is a question. I do this shit all the time where it's like I ask 1,000 things and then what were you asking, Paul? It sounds like what you were saying is I stayed put and experimented rather than just slowly pull back. Or did you know I left to experiment rather than slowly pull back or slowly
mm.
quit? Like that was the part I wasn't quite sure on.
Well, I guess I'm still experimenting is my point.
Mm-hmm.
But, now writing is taking a little bit more than coaching and retreats and things like that. I'm doing a lot more writing with a book in mind, but I don't know if it'll ever become a book. Maybe it'll just live on Substack. And it's just like, I'm okay with all of that. I think it will become a book, but the if you think about scales, the old school scales, when you think about it, I shifted all of my energy and my focus from work and my family. And I pulled back and looked at myself, because my dad was like, you're never going to make any money. You can't be a coach. This is crazy. When you talk to people, you're like, oh my goodness. But I'm like, what do I want at the end of the day? Because I had seen my mom in such dire straits. I'd seen my boss obviously lose her life right after she got MD and things like that. I was like, this can go wrong pretty fast. So what the heck do I want to do? And by going within, I gave myself the space to pull back from the grind. I still sent, if the expectation was you send 100 email replies, maybe I sent 75. And
Mm-hmm.
with those 25 emails I didn't send, I was listening to an audiobook. I was declining a meeting that I probably didn't need to be at anyway. I was just being
Mm-hmm.
busy. So I really shifted the focus, not 100% to your point, but I shifted it a little bit more to myself. And yes, some of it was at night. Some of it was while I was driving around on, podcasts or books on Audible, but I allowed that experimentation to create a path and a plan for an exit strategy.
Mm-hmm.
But in doing that, only that 25% originally that I could dedicate energetically, time wise, money wise, all the things, it lifted me up I was like glowing. people would say to me, your face has changed. Well, because I was filling my own cup, I was finally happy. Even with that little shift, I was like, oh my God, this is fun. I'm having fun again. Or I just learned a new fact. And it wasn't about a regulation that FINRA had sent out or the SEC, right? It was like, oh, I am growing again. And that's
Mm.
ultimately what got me through those 5 years. It fed another part of me. And then some things I don't do, or I took a class and I'm like, I didn't love that, or that didn't land for me, or that didn't click. But I still got something out of it, likely a relationship, likely
Hmm.
a friendship, likely, gift.
Yeah. Well, I love that because, there's this little bit sideways, but oftentimes, we as people talk about the whole, oh, that everything happens for a reason, that had a point and a purpose and that sort of thing. And it's like, yeah, that can be true. And what I'm hearing from your experiences is like, and I can look for the meaning in the things that I can do, or I can
Mm-hmm.
look for the value in the things that I chose, or I can look for the things that I took from the things that I ultimately said no to or walked away from.
Absolutely.
Let me jump into the fourth question. This is such great stuff. And I really like, I'm hearing these themes of explore, focus on yourself, what matters to you, what's important to you, allowing yourself the space and the activity to pursue or look into the things that matter to you. You've already answered part of this question, I think. So let's see what else you would add. And the fourth question is, what has changed for you as a result of sitting on this comma?
Sometimes I still don't like the commas. I'm not going to lie. Sometimes those pauses are hard.
Hmm.
But in general, I think it's the ability to really assess and gain alignment. So before I was definitely floundering. I was floundering through each day, floundering through each week. And looking back, it was a blur. I'm sure a lot of people who are extremely stressed out or times, it's like this blackout zone where you don't even know, or people will tell me I did or said something in that period of time. Like, I don't even remember saying that. Whoa, I
Hmm.
don't remember being there because you're just going through the motions. And I think getting clear and giving myself the space on that comma to explore, it's like, what are my values? What is working? And when you make decisions, when you, meaning the collective we, when I make decisions based on my values and my vision, I think that is the gotten me to what people call today manifesting. Like I create these
Mm.
opportunities because it's aligned. And when you make decisions for other people or the shoulds or something that is not aligned or embodied, then it's really hard to make it happen because somewhere along the line it gets to be another comma. But I think in
Hmm.
order for me to get off of that comma, I had to be like, let's make some decisions that make sense for me right now. And I only go out about a year, 6 months to a year, because COVID taught me that. My mom's illness taught me that. My own
Hmm.
surgery last fall taught me that. Like things can change pretty quickly. I've had some friends of friends have some major loss, in an instant, just the person's gone. And so
Yeah,
recognizing that it's like, well, what are we doing to stay aligned? Okay, decisions against my values. And you can't always do that. You have to pay the bills and it's not always perfect. And
sure.
I tell anyone, I really work with people over 25, but sometimes I get friends, kids who are graduating from college. I'm like, you're going to have to make copies. I don't know if anyone makes copies anymore, but eventually you're going to have to do some dirty work. We all do it, right? Like we're all doing all the things. And so,
Hmm.
yeah, I just think it's the
Yeah.
opportunity to get off of the comma by making aligned decisions and not being afraid.
Well, and even to that point, what I hear you saying is like making aligned and value centered decisions doesn't mean that you're not going to roll your sleeves up, get your hands dirty, or do some things that you don't enjoy. But if those things support your ability to pursue the other things, then isn't that in and of itself an intentional or a choiceful I don't like that word, but I just used it, a decision of choice, right? Like the difference is I'm not doing that because I feel like I'm a victim and I don't have any other choices. The difference is I'm doing that because it's kind of the dirty work I need to do right now in order to continue to pursue these things that I do want for myself. And they are very much linked and attached versus separate.
Yeah. Again, so beautifully said. Hit the nail on the head. You have to know why you're doing it. If you're doing it because you're like, it's going to get me, I've got to get to step 5. Well, I'm at step 0. So this step 1 is going to get me to 5. It's not 5 yet. It doesn't feel great. Okay. I'm going to stick to it. I'm staying in my job because I have to do 20 hours of free coaching or free massage therapy in order to eventually get my certificate. Well, then that's why you're staying, or I'm staying until my husband finds a new job. Like, know why you're in that space if it's not entirely aligned. And nothing's ever a 10 for 10. I mean, it's never perfectly aligned. You got to get, over 50% to continue on.
Yeah. Well, one of the best questions that was ever asked of me, and I continue to use that with friends and clients, is like, I remember saying something about, oh, I'm really stuck. I'm off course here. Like I'm doing this thing. It's not really where I want to go and everything. It's like, and I remember the person saying, well, what if it's actually part of the plan? What if you were to look at it from the perspective of this is actually part of the plan or part of the story, what would you say? And I was like, talk about a fucking reframe,
Right.
So cool.
I still, even as I'm writing and I'm putting some accountability around I have so many journals covering all over. I love to write. I've always loved to journal, but now I've got to do something with them. So I'm just trying to go through them and see what scribbles make sense to move forward. And I think about the worst English teacher I ever had. The best, he was like the worst because he was so mean and he had these like crinkly fingers and he was like, they were all stained from red pen and calloused. And you knew he was chugging coffee all day and his coffee breath. He was so mean. And you know what? I'm so grateful to him as I go through these journals. I'm like, he gave me discipline. He taught me grammar rules, talk about a comma. I'm like, he actually set me up in 8th grade to have some level of discipline around writing and structured writing. So it's sort of like you said, like I had to go through that terrible 8th grade moment. And I'm joking, but in all seriousness, like maybe this is the way. Maybe it's never a ladder. There's always dips and forests and forest creatures we've got to go around, those ogres, right?
Yeah.
But to know you can be miserable or upset or distraught and I mean miserable at a corporate gig or whatever you're doing or sick and still have a vision. I've always held a vision. And I think it helps get me through anyway.
And that's a perfect segue into the last question, and then we'll start to wrap things up. So Lynn, what does getting off the comma look like for you?
It is a slow and steady walk off of the comma. It is not a race. It is not a sprint. It is not a jump. I do not have any carabiner rock climbing gear on. It is literally just a slow and steady, practical way. I think we all want this fancy story that Hollywood could write up or Netflix could write up for us. And really, it's often one step in front of the other.
Well, and I believe that it often is a really amazing story, but it can't be an amazing story until hindsight. Like it's just kind of like it's life while it's happening. But even if you want it to be some amazing story, like it's probably not going to happen until you get up to a certain point and you can look backwards at it. That's where the real amazing part kicks in, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Otherwise, it's the amazingness of the existence. But I feel you on that one, right? Let's quit looking to Hollywood to learn how to live our lives, right?
It just doesn't work.
I so appreciate everything you've shared with us. Obviously, a lot of this, as you could tell, resonates with me. You talk about the speed of your career. I grew up in retail, so same insanity, right? And it's just so many things that you've talked about resonate with me, and I know are going to resonate with people who are listening. And on that note, if people are curious about what you're up to or what you're working on or the things that you're exploring as you've described, or maybe they want to reach out and get in touch with you, I'll put all the links in the show notes for people, but where can people find you?
Absolutely. I'm pretty active on Instagram _Lynn Mull, and my website is my name. I'm also have a lot of little essays and blog posts on Substack called The Clarity Collective. Or again, it's under my name, Lynn Mull.
Okay. And the last thing, Lynn, that we do before we wrap up is obviously this podcast is all about giving a voice to people, and for us to be able to hear the stories of everyday people like ourselves and pull wisdom from these stories that matter to us or that resonates with us. And your story wouldn't really be complete if we didn't allow you to lift up other voices too. And so I call this section acknowledgments. And so as you think about the people in your circle, who you might give a voice to, boost, lift up. And that could be causes, organizations. It could be other creators or people in your life, family, loved ones. Who would you like to give a voice to and acknowledge today?
Oh, this is so incredible. And everybody needs to be doing this. This is like a big gratitude practice. But Mary Beth LaRue is one of my teachers, friends, mentors. We have this very symbiotic relationship, and I'm blessed. Her story continues to evolve, but she's my embodiment teacher, has done a lot of work to hold me accountable to staying embodied. And Christine Gardner is a friend. We share a birthday. She just keeps it so positive, and we don't see each other often, but we are very connected, keeps me on course, and is such a good person to look to. And then Sue Longo is really got me started. She was the one who let me do holistic healing in her store in Fairfield, Connecticut. So Sue owns Element 50 in Fairfield. And she said, sure, you can work out of our store before I open, and let me have my first real paying Reiki clients. So I think these are names of women, and I'm going to stay there for now, but they're obviously my dad, my husband, my father-in-law all help me. My brother-in-law is helping my husband. So it takes an entire village to support all of us. And it doesn't, even if I think people should look to whoever they find comfort in, gender aside, right? Like if someone has a skill, or just start asking them questions, let it unfold.
I love that. I'm a big proponent of that, but like so often, like the power of the questions themselves, and like, switch from telling to asking and see what shows up for you, right? I love that. And definitely encourage everyone to check out Lynn's links and the links of the folks that she's acknowledged where they're available, and see what's going on in her world. Lynn, thank you. There's so much more we could have unpacked. We could have gone so many more directions talking about the right?
I know.
And instead we're going to leave it at this, but we will definitely be excited to follow where you go from here. And just thank you so much for being on the episode today.
Thank you. This is like an accountability podcast, because I talked about writing a book. So now I have to keep doing it in order to write one.
It's interesting. Writing seems to be the theme that's showing up. It's showing up a lot lately, but I'm gonna give a shout out to Katrina Kennedy, who was one of my earliest guests over a year ago, actually. And she actually had been sitting on a book for years. And this isn't a coaching podcast. We don't try to get you to an outcome or ask for declarations. But she literally got to a point where I'm like, it sounds like you're making a declaration. And do you know, she made a declaration she was going to get that book written, and she is now publishing almost a year later. So
amazing. Look at the power of all of this.
Right. So you just said it sounds like a declaration. So like, okay.
It's feeling good.
What declaration do you want to make?
I am going to write a book, and I'm going to get it published.
Nice. As a coach, I could say by when and what's going to get in the way and all that, but I'm not going to push you. So
not today.
We'll follow your story for sure. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and I will certainly look forward to the after the mic conversation.
Thank you.
What an honor it is for me to witness these powerful stories. I hope you feel the same way too. Think about what you learned from this conversation. What stood out for you? What challenged you? What inspired you? And I encourage you to write it down in some form of journaling and reflection. Surprises can reveal themselves to you when you do this. And if you were moved by today's conversation, pass it along to someone you care about. Let's spread the word. Let's continue to build connection. And if you do discover something you'd like to unpack further, book a call with me and let's talk about it. My links are in the show notes. Be sure to like this episode, follow the podcast here on this platform and social media at Off the Comma. And feel free to comment and interact with these posts and episodes. Check out my website for workshops, events, and my sponsor community. I'm covering the costs of production by curating my own sponsors who align with our vision. Be sure to check them out. They're all powerful people and businesses. Thank you for listening to this episode of Off the Comma. As always, keep noticing and keep listening.